Animals, same thing. You're going to check that box on that page, whether you have IACUG pending or not, the approval date. Actually, vertebrate animals are sometimes harder and more details than human subjects. You have to make sure if you're euthanizing that it's consistent with the American Veterinary Medical Association, I think. And then it's going to have 3 sections, just like the human subjects has sections. So you're going to describe your procedures, your justifications. Why are you using 10 rats? What kind of rats are they? And, you know, why this rabbit versus that rabbit? And then how are you going to minimize pain and distress? Where are they housed? Do you have vets? Who's going to do the anesthetizing? All these types of things. Are you going to, you know, stabilize them while they're being imaged? Are you putting them in one of those little tubes? Is it, you know, a good tube? All these things. There are people who will read these sections very, very carefully, and again ding you because you're not kind of paying attention to the safety and the pain and distress of the animals. Select agents. Sometimes you'll have these. These are biohazardous agents, and there's a whole list at their website as to exactly what they consider biohazardous agents. But you have to identify 3 points again. You have to identify what those agents are going to be. You have to provide the registration status of all the entities where they'll be used. There's, you know, you can't just have biohazards in your office. You have to be approved to have that kind of stuff. If you're doing, for example, narcotics and stuff, you have to talk about the safes. They're not biohazardous, but you might want to include that information here simply because it's something that people may ask about. And again, provide a description of all the facilities where these biohazards are going to be used, the monitoring process, use, transfer. If you're going to be transferring, you know, radio tracers from one site to another, how are you going to do that? Is it a lead box? You're just going to walk it over, give it to some kid on a bike? You know, what are you going to do? What are your plans for biosafety, biocontainment, security? Do you have keypads on all your doors? Stuff like that. And what are your biocontainment resources? So again, these types of sections are important. This is a new section that they've added, the authentication of key biological endochemical resources. And basically, they're asking you to basically verify sort of the provenance of all of your chemical resources or biological. And this includes cell lines, special chemicals, antibodies, or other biologics. So who are you going to buy them from? What's your justification for using them? Why are you using this cell line versus another cell line, and things like that. Standard laboratory reagents and stuff that aren't expected to vary. You don't have to include soap buffers and all that other stuff. This is just really key chemicals and biologicals that you have to include. And basically say, you know, where you're going to get them from and why you're going to use those vendors. The resource sharing plan is not mandatory for all grants. It will say it in the RFP if it is. And what they're talking about here, this is a separate section. This is not included in your page count again. They're talking about data sharing or sharing model organisms. If you're going to create a new knockout gene or something, are you going to share that? Genomic data sets and so on. It is not required, again, but I suggest that you always include it, simply because it looks good. This is a paragraph. It's not that complicated. This is an example of one from mine. So we developed some software. It was called Workstation J for presenting images and collecting scores. So we said, here, we'll make it available. Oh, by the way, it already is. Here's the link to it. So we're already sharing. Then we're going to make our image sets upon request. We're not just going to put them out on the web. They're de-identified. They're HIPAA compliant. But hey, if anybody else wants them, give me a call. And if I like you, I'll give them to you. Okay? And then there's various data analysis programs that we've used, different ROC, LROC, FROC, all this other stuff. Oh, and here, by the way, we're already sharing. Here's the link for that. Okay. At the very least, I always, you know, put something. If you don't have software, you don't have this, you know, we will share all of our results and our data with anybody upon request. Boom. One sentence. Just so, again, you're showing the reviewers, one, that you're willing to play in everybody else's sandbox, which is good, and that you're paying attention to all the sections on the grant, whether you have to or not. Budget. Budget kind of scares a lot of people. because you think, oh my God, I'm not an accountant. Well, you don't have to be. Again, the RAS, the pre-award, is going to help, but they need you. They cannot do this on their own. They're good at, figuring out the F&A, the fringe benefits, the direct costs, the indirect costs, tallying it up, taking it from year to year. But what do they need to know from you? They need to know whether you're thinking about a modular or a detailed budget. And they're always going to want a detailed budget for internal purposes, whether or not you submit a modular budget or not. Modular budgets, by the way, are simply at the NIH saying they come in $250,000 modules. And so you can get up to X number of modules, and you simply say, okay, I'm going to ask for the 250,000 or 500,000 per year, and you don't have to know the details. We'll do it here at our institution. The institution's going to want to know how you divide that up. And so what does the RAS need to know in order to help you? They need to know who you're putting on the grant, okay? They can go and look up their salaries. You don't have to do that. That's their job. But they have to know who you want. Are they going to be key personnel, or are they sort of just students and stuff? They're going to want to know why. They're going to want to know how much effort. They can't make this up. They're going to ask you, okay, you've got Dr. Smith. What percentage do you want them on this grant? And you have to tell them. And then you're going to have to write the budget justification. They cannot write the budget justification. They don't know why you're putting Dr. Smith on. They don't know who Dr. Smith is. They just know their salary. So they'll help with all of the budget items. But again, you have to put input. Equipment is considered a greater than $5,000. If it's less than $5,000, those are just supplies. So, right, unfortunately now computers are more like supplies now. They used to be equipment. Some high-end piece of equipment. On one of my grants, we put an ECG system, and it was about $20,000. So that was considered equipment. And what's good about the RAS and figuring out budgets is some things count towards indirect costs, some things don't cost or count towards the indirect costs, and that's their responsibility to figure all that out. But your responsibility is you want that ECG, you have to write to the company and get a quote. That's your responsibility as a PI. It's not their responsibility, because they're not going to, the company's going to ask them, okay, well, what do you want? Do you want it customized? Do you want this? They're going to say, I don't know. I don't even know what this thing is. So again, it's your responsibility to go out and get that information and get the quote. I always tell people, if you're going to, include something, big ticket item, get a quote and include that in the grant. Okay. Travel is a good one. People like to pad travel. I've seen budgets of $30,000 in travel per year, and it's like, oh, no, where are you people going? And so travel, most people, maybe 5,000, between 5 and 10 is sometimes reasonable. But boy, justify it. Say, who's going? Where are we going? We're going to RSNA. I'm taking me, and I'm taking one of my postdocs. And then we'll take our consultant. Okay, so there's 3 of us going to RSNA. Why? Because we're going to present the data. Okay, is it reasonable in year 1 to have 3 or 4 people going? How much data can you have? Well, we think we're going to have a lot. Look at our timeline. We're going to have this data. Okay, so justify your travel. Okay, in the budget justification section. And don't just, RSNA, 3 people. Why are you going? There are participant and trainee support costs. A lot of times it's mandated by the university that you support students, their insurance, their health insurance, their coursework, and so on. It varies from institution to institution. So find out from here what you need. Other direct costs, these are materials and supplies, these are computers, these are your buffers, your reagents, these are your animals, these are gift cards for your subjects, publication costs, consultant services can fall under here. Your subcontracts fall under a line under here, but you will talk about them in your budget justification under personnel and so on. Equipment or space rental. Are you renting space? And you better tell them why you're renting rather than just using your lab, at your place. Are you going to have to do any alterations and renovations that you're expecting the NIH to pay for, or whoever? Tuition remission goes here, animal care costs, patient care costs, all that other stuff goes under other direct costs. And again, in your budget justification, you really want to explain why you're including all of these costs, okay? Because at the end of every review, after they've gone through the science and after they've done everything and after you've voted, there's a question, okay? Everybody around the table's voted, you got your score. And then the chair of the review session says, okay, are there any budget concerns? Because the budget is not a scoreable item. But they can come through and say, well, I don't think they need 5 years. Let's give them 4. Why? Because you didn't put a timeline. You didn't justify. Hey, they got $30,000 in travel. Let's cut that down to 5. They didn't justify it. Personnel, 5 postdocs? They don't need 5 postdocs. I don't know what they're doing. They got Fred Smith from Duke on there. What the heck is he there? I don't know why he's there, but boy, they're covering 50% of his salary, but they never told me what he's doing. Let's cut out Fred. Okay? And they make all these recommendations. And these recommendations, the SRO is writing all this down. And this all goes, if you get funded, the budget people will sit there and ask you, this is what they said. They're recommending all these cuts. Can you justify why we should give you this money? And if you can't, they're going to cut it all. Okay? They're going to cut 10% off the top anyway. That's what they all do. But they may cut more. In terms of budget, read the program announcement. Find out what's required. Sometimes there are actual costs that are required you include. So, for example, for K awards and other awards, there's a minimum amount of time that you have to participate on that grant, 75% of your time, and you better ask for 75% of your salary. Sometimes you're required to go to sponsor meetings. The Department of Defense typically has these Era of Hope meetings, and you as a PI are required to go to that annual meeting, but they let you cover the costs out of your grant. And so if you're going to include travel, make sure you include that meeting plus an RSNA meeting, and they'll let you go with that. So find out what the required costs are. Also find out if there's limits. Are they using the NIH salary cap? The NIH obviously does, but is anybody else asking you to use the salary cap? And also, if this does occur, make sure, for example, on a K award, that the department's going to cover the rest. Indirect costs, these are negotiated by the university. Every university has their own indirect cost rate. Ours is 50.52%, I think. And it changes on a regular basis. But there are some granting agencies, even federal government, plus a lot of the foundations, will only pay up to a certain amount. So, for example, the R13 that I just submitted, the conference grant, they don't allow any indirect costs at all. Well, now this isn't a problem because it's a conference grant, but I could not allow indirect costs. A lot of foundations, HRSA, or not HRSA is a federal government agency, a grant I have from them, and they limit their indirect cost to 15%. So even if the university has negotiated 52% with the federal government's only going to pay 15% on this one. A lot of the foundations limit to about 10% or 15%, and some of them don't allow it at all. And so you've got to make sure before you submit that you ask me under Carolyn if we're going to cover that difference, because we have to pay a tax on that basically. Any indirect costs that are not brought in at the university level, we have to cover. We pay a little tax on that. Find out if there's any exclusions in the budget. Some foundations and even federal agencies, they will exclude some costs. A lot of foundations will not allow travel, will not allow major equipment. The conference grants will not allow you to buy food. No NIH grant will allow you to, for example, part of your grant is we're going to have all of our board of advisors come together. Okay, because we're doing a big program, project grant, whatever, want to bring everybody together. You can pay for their travel, you can pay for their hotel, you can't pay for the croissants and donuts that you're going to feed them or the coffee. Okay, different things. So find out what the exclusions are. Find out if you need matching funds. NIH equipment grants. Not necessarily always matching funds, but they're going to want to find out what your university contribution is, and a number of foundations do require matching funds. Especially a lot of foundations that are to support equipment. They're going to want you to cover part of the costs as well. And find out about cost of living increases and whether they're allowed or not. and that has to go in your budget. In the justification, justify absolutely everything. If there's a line item in your budget, justify it. Even if it's a modular budget, justify, justify, justify. So the personnel, list all their names, why they're there. Again, grab this off of that Biosketch. How long are they on the project? Are they on for every year? Are they on for just 2 years? Why are they only on for 2 years? What's their percent effort? Is it changing over the period of your 4 years? And I always note this in my research plan. As often as I can, when I'm talking about specific aims and tasks, I'm putting a name in parentheses. This is Dr. Smith who's in charge of this task. Ah, okay. Oh, I see why they're justified too. I see why they're on the grant. Travel, again, grants versus meetings. Are you meeting because it's part of the grant and you have to because you're a multi-institutional project and you don't want to meet once a year, or you go into scientific meetings? Which meetings? Why are you going to these meetings? It's in Hawaii. That's great, but is it a radiology meeting? Who's going to the meeting? Equipment. Make sure if you're going to buy something that your facility section, which we'll get to next, doesn't say you already have one. I've seen that happen. Oh, well, we have this super cool computing center and it has all of these gigabytes and all this other stuff. Oh, but I want a new whole computer here. It's like, wait a minute, you just told me you're the state of the art and yet you want 20,000 more, So make sure they jive. And make sure it matches, and make sure, again, everything else is just absolutely justified. Why do you need 5 postdocs? Why do you need, $20,000 worth of, hydrogen peroxide or whatever? Absolutely everything in that budget needs to be justified somehow. There's a section called Facilities and Equipment, and I have been collecting these from folks here in the department. So I have quite a few descriptions of the facilities that are available. You can just kind of tailor them down. I have both clinical, I got it from Dale, kind of describing all what we have over the whole enterprise in terms of imaging devices, plus a description of Wesley Woods, CSI, all that kind of stuff. If it's relevant to your own particular lab, you're probably going to want to create that on your own. But the facilities and equipment, this page is important because what it's telling people is that you have the infrastructure to do what you're proposing. So in this facilities and equipment, again, it's only a description of what's relevant to the proposed work. Sometimes I've seen some where they're talking about our university has all these undergraduates and all these graduates and all these buildings and this and that. And it's like, well, who cares? Tell me what you have in your department and your lab. So make sure what you're telling them is relevant. Tell them about your labs. What type are they? Are they wet labs? Are they dry labs? Are they moist labs? What kind of space? Is it a 10 by 10? Or do you have 5 hoods? And what are the resources available to you in terms of those labs? List your major equipment. And again, make sure it jives with what you're asking for versus what you have. And make sure, for example, if you're proposing in your proposal to do 7T imaging, that you have in your facilities description a description of that 7T device, because not everybody has them. And if I'm going through and I'm thinking 7T, boy, that's so state-of-the-art, no, they don't tell me that. I don't think they can do this because they don't tell me they have one. And I'm not going to go to the website to find out what I'm not going to call their department. Hey, do you guys have 7T? Well, my job is a reviewer. I'm simply going to say, I don't think they can do it because they don't have 7T. Okay? And somebody else on the review committee might say, well, I think they do. It's like, well, they didn't tell me. Okay. Offices, computers. Talk about your cores if you're going to use them. Talk about your administrative. If you're going to be running some sort of small clinical trial, pilot trial with subjects and so on, do you have clinical coordinators? Do you have nurses? Are you going to use a stat section, or did you put a statistician on your grant and so on? So talk about, again, all the things that go towards convincing people that you have the infrastructure to do what it is you're saying you're going to do. Appendices. Okay. People love appendices, but I can guarantee you most reviewers don't read them. Okay. So don't ever assume that the reviewers are even going to look at these appendices. They are when you go into the system as a reviewer. You get a list of the grants that you're assigned to. There's a link. You click on that link and it goes to another page where it lists all the documents. And there is the main package, which is all that boilerplate gobbledygook, all the form pages, all the biosketches, all the facilities, all these sections and so on. The grant. The appendices are a separate link. Okay? Not everybody's going to click that separate link to download and or print out your appendices. You cannot, by any stretch of the imagination, use appendices as a replacement for text. So if you're sitting there in your proposal going through and saying, you know, and you've got a method that's not standard, okay? You can describe it there in the text of your grant, which is probably what you should be doing, in at least enough detail so they, oh, I see what they're doing. Okay? You cannot simply say, we're going to use this method and link to a publication. No can do. Okay? You can have up to 10 PDFs. Make sure the name indicates the contact, so when they go into the appendices, they'll see Appendix 1, 2, blah, blah. And here, this is Publication 1, Publication 2, whatever, okay? What can you include? You may include publications, but one, there's only a maximum of 3, so you cannot have 10 papers out there. And these papers cannot just be what anybody else can go online and find. They can be accepted but not published. That's a legitimate appendix, okay? Especially if it's relating to a method that you're proposing and this is the first time it's published. That would be one good reason for a publication to be included here. And in the text to say, I'm going to give you the bare minimum of details here. So in the text, you know, where you're writing your proposal, I would say, briefly, this is our method. We have recently published it here and provided it as an appendix, okay, for more details. But briefly, I'm telling you here what it is. Okay? If it has been published, but it is not free, online, or publicly available with a link, you could include it as well. So some of these, like a lot of the IEEE papers, you go on, you go through Google Scholar, PubMed, the IEEE papers, you always got to go on, oh, put it in my cart. Here, pay $30 for an article. That would be one reason to include here as well. Okay? You might want to include patents, data collection tools. If you're doing some sort of survey with your patients, include a copy of the survey. A clinical protocol, you can include that. You might include your informed consent documents if there's something very different and you know, they're going to sit there and say, oh, come on, nobody, you know, no IRB is going to approve this. Well, you already got IRB approval. Here's your consent documents. You have proof. So it's stuff that will complement or back up some of the stuff you said in the text. And if the reviewers are like, huh, they can go to the appendix. Oh, yeah, okay, well, I guess they did do this. Okay? But again, don't assume ever that they're going to, because in all likelihood, the majority of reviewers don't go to the appendices. Okay? For example, on my recent, on the R13 I just submitted, I included a report from the previous grant, which on that is allowable. So, on the, you know, what did we do at our last conference? I include a list of all of our scholars that we've supported over the years and where they are now. Why? Because I'm arguing that coming to our conference promotes people to stay in medical image perception and stay in radiology. So I say, here's all the scholars, here's where they are. Okay? And then I included a description of the facility. So I laid out at the conference center. I got pictures from the website. Here's the possible rooms that we have. Because sometimes when you're doing a conference grant, they may not believe that, come on, Emory Conference Center, what are they going to have that could hold 200 people? Well, I just showed them the documents. for scientific grants. Things like data collection tools, surveys, those are all very important to include, even if they're not yours. So for example, in one of them, I included something called the SOFI, which is the Swedish Occupational Fatigue Inventory, which is a verified, validated thing, but I don't want to have people go searching through the literature, so I just provided them a copy. Here, go read it, fill it out yourself, see how tired you are. Okay? If they looked at it, fine. If not, that's fine too. So those are all really the key boilerplate things. And I guess the real message is don't blow it off. People tend to. This is boring, this is tedious, oh God, I don't want to do this, and they wait till the last minute. They're asking for CVs and biosketches from their collaborators 2 days before it's due, and that's just not enough time. A lot of this stuff can be done so far in advance. You know, sometimes as you're sitting there and you're writing and you're like, oh God, I'm so tired of writing this, I'm losing myself. Stop. Go write your facility section. That's like mindless, yet it's got to be done. And then you'll come back and you'll be, I see what I'm trying to say. You know, you'll come back to your grant and you'll say, oh, now where you are. So don't just put it off till the end, because this stuff, believe it or not, is more important than you think it is. Any questions?